Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. The next 24 minutes of this video is an introduction that I am placing at the beginning of a dozen or so videos. This introduction regards the prophetic signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, 2025. If you have already watched this introduction in another video, you can skip ahead no more than 24 minutes from this point. All right, it is predicted that famous singer Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. This email was composed, as we can see here, on November 15th. Prior to October 30th and October 31st, 2025, it was predicted that Paul Simon would slip and fall and injure his head on October 30th, and it was predicted that the news of this would first be reported on October 31st. God orchestrated a myriad of connections from other prophetic signs in order to confirm this analysis for October 30th and 31st. In other words, these connections from the other prophetic signs were known in advance of October 30th and 31st to be pointing to October 30th and 31st. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. All right. November 27th, 2025, also ended up being another step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is now predicted to be on December 19th. And we know this, the date December 19th, because of the prophetic signs that occurred on November 27th and other connections. Just like how we knew November 27th ahead of time because of the signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, which the rest of this 18-minute introduction will explain. This introduction is extremely important. None of the videos, every minute of them, cannot be skipped. The reason why God does these, this is how it works. It works on the principle of interconnected signs. None of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And God does this in order to tell, for a very good reason, and that is to tell these stories that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell without these interconnected signs that develop these stories through the information, through the themes and connections. And it is through these stories that God is communicating extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. Now, it's not complicated if you don't want it to be. In other words, if you are a skeptic and you don't want this prediction to be true, fair enough. Well, not fair enough. You are a completely irrational person when the prediction comes to pass on December 19th. Okay, but I'm going to explain how it works. And in this introduction, we now have two steps that were known ahead of time. It's not complicated. October 30th and 31st, and then once these dates came to pass, we received the clear and relevant prophetic signs that ended up pointing to November 27th, as I mentioned, which was 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. And I'll explain why that's extremely irrelevant. You will see. Stay with me. Now, on October 27th, I'm just going to state briefly here, I'll explain it more in another video, or videos plural. We had the prophetic sign, one of them being the bat, the baseball bat. Paul Simon is known to be an avid baseball fan, as is the Antichrist, known to be a fan of the Chicago White Sox, which is why the fan of the Chicago White Sox, the first black president, who is the second of two Antichrists, was given as a gift a baseball bat from the historic legendary Chicago White Sox player, who was number 2, wore jersey number 2, and his name was Nellie Fox, and it was given to the first American Pope on his plane as he was departing Rome on his first international trip abroad to 2 nations. So God uses firsts in general for prophetic signs. Here we have the first black president from Chicago, who was an avid baseball fan of the Chicago White Sox. Everyone knows that, right? He threw out the first pitch in the playoffs. He famously wore his Chicago outfit when he threw the first pitch for the baseball team in Washington when he got booed for it. He also threw out the first pitch while wearing his Chicago stuff at the All-Star game after he became president. Okay, so he's Mr. Chicago White Sox, right? And anyway, he is also from Chicago, just like the first American Pope. And this number 2 bat was given to the Pope, the first American Pope, who is from Chicago, at the beginning of his 2-nation trip. So that gave us the number 22, which is a number that God uses in his signs to symbolize the mark of the Antichrist, which the Antichrist will enforce. And he also pairs 9 and 22 together. So this 9 plus 9 plus 9 days is followed with this sign that gives us the number 22. And it is 22 days from November 27th to December 19th, the date that is predicted that Paul Simon will fall and injure his head. And that's because the mark of the Antichrist will injure people's heads. And I should just, add why the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist is because in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 9, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described, and that would have been a Tav mark. The Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the 22nd and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist changes or alters a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs of 2, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2. And so that is enough for now. Like I said, I'll explain more about what happened on November 27th in another video. There's, of course, a lot more to this. I'm just saying this now just simply to establish how this works and how we get from October 30th and 31st, December 19th. Okay, now the rest of this video must be watched. I mean the rest of this introduction to this video, which will explain how October 31st connected to November 27th with 9 plus 9 plus 9 days. I won't explain how, I'll explain why. I'll explain how this is important. First of all, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is the number 9, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. What do I mean by step in the trail of signs? Well, God's prophetic signs, none of them can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs, something that is mostly missed by other people that are interested in God's signs. And this is also why the vast majority of God's signs are completely unknown and missed and are only being talked about on this channel. The reason why God does this is he is able to tell stories through the big picture of signs and interconnected signs that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell from one single prophetic sign isolated on its own. That's why these signs are not recognized in general by other so-called watchers, and the signs that are recognized are not fully appreciated or understood. The reason why God tells these stories is in order to communicate extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know, that is only being communicated or explained, I should say, on this channel. And for example, there was a tremendous theme that God was using for October 30th and 31st, Halloween, that God didn't, I assume, I can gather, want to use for the final date of Paul Simon's fall and then death. These signs and this theme of Halloween are extremely important, and you will see what I am talking about when you watch these other videos, including probably this video, because what I'm doing right now is making an introduction to these other videos that predicted October 30th and 31st. In other words, there are about 10 other videos that must be watched, every minute of them. And when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they do need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. When the prediction comes to pass that Paul Simon will fall and hit his head and injure his head on November 27th, and it being reported on November 28th, it will prove all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days ahead of the predicted fall. And the reason why that's important is because this will prove all of the information in these other 10 videos that God was telling through these stories that he designed to lead up to October 30th and 31st. He didn't do this for any reason at all. He did this for extremely important reasons. And so that's the purpose of a step in the trail of signs. It further paints the picture and enables God to tell these stories. And these stories could not be possibly told without these steps that served to connect the other prophetic signs in the big picture web of God's signs. Believe me, I know far better than anyone the purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the things that I am saying in these videos, and especially the controversial things that I am saying, which will be proven to be true because they are proven beyond a doubt through God's big picture of signs, which in turn will be proven to be true when this prediction comes to pass. And so hopefully I have made it clear why God did this for October 30th and 31st. In other words, what I'm about to explain in the next couple of minutes is an explanation for the prophetic signs that occurred on October 31st and 30th, and which are these dates that we expected such signs in advance of these dates. And when the prediction comes to pass on November 27th, it will prove that October 30th and 31st were indeed steps in the trail of signs, and therefore all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st that was explained in advance of these dates is 100% correct. To not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, the point of this video, and the point of the videos on this channel. You might as well turn this video off. If you do not appreciate this, you are wasting your time. Okay, so that's what's going on here. So that's, again, why it is that this video must be watched, and the rest of this video will talk about how God pointed to October 30th and 31st ahead of time, and now you understand why he did this and why it is important that you learn what God did to point to these dates ahead of time. Because what God did to point to these dates ahead of time are the stories that contain the knowledge that you need to know. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon, as we expected in advance of these dates. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 + 9 + 9 days after October 31st. Elvis Presley famously covered Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water song, and Presley died from the effects of his fall in his mansion when he hit his head on a porcelain bathtub. Most people don't know this, but professionals believe that the true reason for Elvis Presley's death was not him taking drugs, but the drugs were taken to deal with the side effects from the severe head injury he had 10 years earlier in 1967, when he fell in his bathroom and hit his head on his porcelain bathtub and was unconscious for an unknown period of time. This, in turn, caused over the years increasingly severe autoimmune diseases as a result of the brain injury. And that's all related to, guess you know what? The Thing, and we will talk about that in these videos. The thing that causes autoimmune diseases. Now, Paul Simon's best-selling album is titled Graceland. His song Graceland is about his journey with his young son to visit the King of Rock, Elvis Presley, the King of Rock and Roll's mansion, Graceland Mansion, in the 4x4th state. Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt, and Memphis, Tennessee is located in the area of the country that is nicknamed Little Egypt. Elvis Presley, incidentally, has a hit song named Little Egypt from his 9th soundtrack album, no less. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic, and I say that because of the 4x4th state and the number 9, and I'm getting ahead of myself here because God pairs 9 and 44 together. So hold on a second. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic of the King of Egypt's palace. And in the Bible, the King of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist king. The Antichrist king, who will reside in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, and God repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and is located at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. This Antichrist king is the 44th president, and he was inaugurated in the year 09. This is why in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, God pairs the numbers 9 and 44 together. On October 30th, King Charles, and by the way, in the Bible, the Israelites escaped the persecution from the King of the King of Egypt, and likewise the Pilgrims escaped the persecution from the King of England, which is King Charles. On October 30th, King Charles formally stripped, and Paul Simon sang about the Pilgrims in his song American Tune. On October 30th, King Charles, formally this date that we knew in advance to relate to Paul Simon, who God is using to point to the King of Rock and Roll. Okay, so on October 30th, King Charles formally stripped Prince Andrew of his royal titles. One of the main stories on October 31st, the following day, was the question of what would become of Prince Andrew's mansion. And also on this day, news broke that Prince Andrew had hired 40 prostitutes in 4 days while he was in the royal kingdom of Thailand. 40 prostitutes in 4 days hints at the number 44. In his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 to confirm his signs and connections. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9, 23, and 44. And I know these are the numbers because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. Okay, and so the reason for 23 and 44 is because the 44th president was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball. And also the thing alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, the mark of the Antichrist. The 44th president is the Antichrist. So in his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together to confirm his signs and connections. The news of Prince Andrew's 40 prostitutes in 4 days in the Royal Kingdom of Thailand was exactly 2 times 300 days after Prince William and Prince Harry visited the King of Rock's Graceland estate and mansion in the 4 times 4th state. And again, the news on this day was Prince Andrew's mansion. And exactly 2,300, or 2 times 300, I should say, days prior, the princes visited the king's Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. That's a pairing of 23 and 44. Furthermore, it pairs with the 40 prostitutes in 4 days at the other end of this timeline. Okay, now this 2 times 300 days is the equivalent of exactly 4,200 days. And in Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist king's rule is symbolized by 42 months. Also, on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet for prophetic signs, trumpeted that he had renovated the Lincoln bathroom in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. President Lincoln was the 4 times 4th president. Also on October 31st, Trump had an interview in his mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, Florida, with CBS for the first time since his $4 times $4 million lawsuit with this news company. That's another pairing of 9 and 44. The 9 plus 9 plus 9th state and the $4 times $4 million lawsuit. These signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, again, the 40 prostitutes in 4 days, and the Lincoln bathroom named after the 4 times 4th president in the White House mansion, which has 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, these signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, including the sign in Trump's mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, are 9 plus 9 plus 9 days before Simon is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head in his house or mansion, if you will, on Thanksgiving on November 27th, 2025. The 4 times 4th president formally began the tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of the month of November. November is Latin for 9. The renovation of the bathroom in the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in his Graceland mansion from the effects of the fall that he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head and ultimately die from his head injury. Okay, I should also add that the Graceland mansion is in the 4 times 4th state. And so the renovation in the bathroom of the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in the Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. from the effects of the fall he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head, like Elvis did, and ultimately die from his head injury. Also on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet, trumpeted that the U.S. is considering conducting a military raid in support of the persecuted Christians in Nigeria, Africa. Simon's Graceland album was controversial because he visited South Africa during apartheid and he used South African musical influences in his songs on the album. One of the released singles from the album is Under African Skies. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will fall and severely injure his head on October 30th, 2025. And this will be first reported in the news on October 31st, 2025. And it is predicted that he will die from his head injury on November 5th, 2025. It is also predicted that the Obamas will return to the White House on January 20th, 2029. And it is predicted that there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach in Rio de Janeiro that will be reported around the world on the date March 22nd, 2029. The date that this video is posted on the social media platform that you are watching this on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does these time-stamped emails and forensic notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will fall and severely injure his head on October 31st, 2025. Or at least it will first be reported in the news on this day. It could be that he will fall and injure his head on the prior day, October 30th. He is also predicted to die from his head injury on November 5th. Okay, it is also predicted that the Obamas will return to the White House on January 20th, 2029. Michelle will be the president, Barack will be the vice president, and she will later step down and he will become the president again, and also the Antichrist. Also, it's predicted on March 22nd, 2029, that there will be a massive worldwide, and what I mean by that, I mean like it'll be the mainstream news all over the world, that there is a massive Mary apparition on the beach of Rio de Janeiro, March 22nd, 2029. I'll explain more about that in a second. The theme, if you will, of this video is this ballroom, this additional ballroom that President Trump has decided to add to the White House. And this ballroom is symbolism for, or hints at, the ballroom in the movie The Shining, which is very important here and ties to Paul Simon, because the actress from The Shining, Shelley Duvall, was in a relationship with Paul Simon for quite a while, and Paul Simon broke up with her at the airport right before she took a flight to the UK to film the movie The Shining. The Shining, let's get this out of the way, let's just start right here. So The Shining is relevant because the movie is about demonic possession, the demonically possessed hotel, which in the movie is a gigantic hotel, which in God's signs is symbolism for a mansion, a very large, gigantic house, if you will. Paul Simon's best-selling solo album is titled Graceland, and it includes a song named Graceland, which is about the Graceland mansion. and Simon's journey to it. Simon sang Graceland at the White House during a state dinner for the Prime Minister of Japan on April 10th, 2024. And the Graceland mansion is symbolic of the White House mansion in which will dwell the Antichrist. I should say the Antichrist king, which is why Graceland is a mansion that was owned by the king of rock and roll in Memphis, Tennessee, which is named after Memphis, Egypt. And the mansion of the kings is symbolic of a king's palace. And in the Bible, the king of Egypt is symbolic of the Antichrist and Satan. The name Satan is mentioned 55 times in the Bible. Paul Simon journeyed down the I-55 highway to get to Memphis, Tennessee in his song Graceland. The reason why he sang Graceland in the White House mansion in front of the Japanese Prime Minister, who was said to have been a fan of Paul Simon, is that God is using Japan in his signs for symbolism for Japanimation, which is obsessed with demonic possession, or rather spiritual possession of people and beings. And that day that Paul Simon sang at the White House was exactly 5 times 7 days, or exactly 5 weeks. Well, now I'm getting off track here. I'm starting to talk about a different diagram. So let me just finish this quickly if I can. The day that Paul Simon sang at the White House was the day that O.J. Simpson died. And O.J. Simpson was more famous than anything, well, more famous than his football career anyway, for his Hertz rental car commercials. The way in which people will become demonically possessed is through frequencies in the air, specifically 5G frequencies, which is why exactly 5 weeks prior to the death of O.J. Simpson, who was known for his Hertz commercials and, of course, Hertz-Synset frequencies, and the singing of Paul Simon in the White House of Graceland, is that 5 weeks exactly earlier, a plane that was on its way to Japan dropped its wheel on the parking lot of the Hertz rental car company. Because Japanimation is known for demonic possession, and this coming demonic possession of those who take the mark of the Antichrist will be triggered through 5G frequencies, which is described in the 5th of 7 trumpets in the Bible, which is why the 5 times 7 weeks. These people, as described in that passage, will be demonically possessed for 5 months. The number 5 is associated with Paul Simon. His name, Paul, is equal to 50 in simple English gematria, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. His name, Paul Simon, is equal to 500 in simple English gematria. His prophetic reunion concert with Art Garfunkel, which is symbolic of civil war, etc., that we are currently going through, that concert raised $50,000 for Central Park and was exactly 500 months before the release of Paul Simon's 7 Psalms album. Paul Simon's only number 1 hit as a solo artist was 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. And again, he traveled down the I-55 to get to Memphis, Tennessee, and on and on. That's because of the 5th of 7 trumpets and the demonic possession that will be triggered by 5G frequencies, and music is frequencies, which is why God is using Paul Simon. Also, he was born in 1941, and 41 is equal to the word key in simple English gematria. In the 5th trumpet, the demons from the bottomless pit will cross over into the earthly realm after the door is unlocked with a key. And also, music composition is known for music keys, and Paul Simon is known as the GOAT, greatest of all time, of pop music composition. God uses goats in his signs to hint at the goat Antichrist. who will be in the White House, which is why Paul Simon sang at the White House his song Graceland 9 months and 11 days before Trump's inauguration. Right here, sorry. Which is in turn 9 months and 11 days to the predicted fall and severe injury of Paul Simon's head. The 5G frequencies will trigger demonic possession through the components that are in people's brains who have taken the mark of the Antichrist, which is why Paul Simon will die from a head injury. The transistors, if you will, in the people's brains that will pick up the 5G frequencies will engender delta brainwaves, which will facilitate demonic possession. This is why the first lyric in the song Graceland is his big song, and the first lyric, the all-important first lyric of the song, symbolic lyric. Well, I'll say this too, in ancient centuries ago, before the invention of titles, literary pieces or music compositions were titled by their first line, the first line. It was called an incipit. The most famous Paul Simon incipit, if you will, is the first line of the Graceland song, which is, "The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar." Well, that might not be his most famous one. It could be up in the running with "Hello Darkness, my old friend, I've come to talk with you again." Anyway. So the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. Well, the delta, like I've just now elaborated on, points to the delta brainwaves that will facilitate demonic possession through the frequencies in the air. The Apostle Paul, as in Paul Simon, described Satan as being the prince of the power of the air, which is why God is using this as symbolism, the 5G frequencies that will trigger demonic possession through delta brainwaves. The Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar because the movie The Shining is about demonic possession. And this ties to Paul Simon, who famously dated Shelley Duvall and broke up with her, famously, right before she flew to the UK at the airport, as in portal, as in door that's unlocked with the key to the bottomless pit, to film the movie The Shining. Okay, now, so this day here, like I said, Trump's inauguration was 9 months and 11 days after, and that, by the way, hints at Revelation 9:11, which is the verse that God is using to symbolize the fifth of 7 trumpets and this demonic possession of people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist through delta brainwaves. The Shining. Okay, so that day that Paul Simon sang to the Japanese Prime Minister as in demonic possession because of Japanimation was 9 months and 11 days before Trump and his inauguration at the White House, and the day that he returned to the White House mansion. And Graceland is about a mansion, and he sang it in the mansion, Paul Simon. And then in turn, it is another 9 months and 11 days to the predicted death of Paul Simon from a head, the fall of his injury of his head, which hints at the Revelation 9:11 and the demonic possession of those who take the mark of the Antichrist through frequencies in the brain that will facilitate delta brainwaves and demonic possession. Now, anyway, on the day of Trump's inauguration, Carrie Underwood, another musician, and arguably one of the GOATs, who won the 4th American Idol, as in idol worship in the Bible, as in Antichrist, and she is known for having fallen onto the steps of her home in the 4 times 4th state. Elvis died from a head injury at his home in the 4 times 4th state. And many people don't know this, but many professionals believe today that Elvis Presley didn't die from drug intake, but the drug intake was him coping with the autoimmune diseases that he suffered from his head injury 10 years prior, when he fell at his home in Los Angeles, as in Fallen Angels, and hit his head on a bathtub. And so Carrie Underwood, in the inauguration, had a power outage, and she had to sing the song a cappella after an awkward period of silence, which was A Sound of Silence. Paul Simon's first hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence. In other words, this was a Paul Simon sign. It was another White House sign, and it was 9 months and 11 days after Paul Simon sang about the Graceland Mansion at the White House Mansion. And Paul Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head, and he sang about the mansion in the 4 times 4th state, and Carrie Underwood is known for having fallen and hit her head on the steps of her home in the 4 times 4th state. That's why this inauguration was exactly 4 times 4 years after the inauguration of the 44th President Antichrist. And again, Carrie Underwood won the 4th American Idol, as in Idol Antichrist. 9 months also is symbolic of birth pains, because Jesus said to his disciples when asked for the timing of his return, answered with a metaphor of birth pains. 9 months is the average human gestation period. So this 9 months and 11 days is also broken into 9 months and then another 11 days. And what does that get us to? This gets us to this date here, which is the, I guess, if you will, the inspiration for this video. This prophetic sign on October 20th, when demolition began at Trump's command on the White House mansion, okay, and for a new ballroom. The movie The Shining, a big part of it is the ballroom. If you know the movie The Shining, you will know what I mean. It's a central part of the plot of this demonic possession theme in the movie, where Jack Nicholson encounters the caretaker and comes to know more about what is going on. It's about the ballroom. It's stunning that God is using this to point to The Shining. And this ballroom will be the 133rd room. Currently, the White House has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue, because the 44th president will dwell in the White House as the Antichrist. But with this ballroom, there will now be 133 rooms. And 133 is the 44th semi-prime number, a number that is only divisible by 2 other prime numbers, and God uses this in his signs. God pairs the numbers 9 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections. 133rd room, 9 months exactly. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which God would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 44, and also 23. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than 7 years. The building blocks of God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, identifies the Antichrist. Because the Antichrist, the 44th president, was inaugurated in 09. Hence the pairing of 9 and 44. It's simple. And for the evangelicals that continue to play the Antichrist guessing game, because they are not watching, well, they are, many are watching, but they just don't know how to watch. And one reason being is that it's not appreciated by them that the full intended meaning of any of God's prophetic signs cannot be properly understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs, as is being explained on this channel. And that's why the vast majority of God's signs are completely missed by the so-called watchers that are still continuing to play the Antichrist guessing game, when in truth, God's big picture of signs is overwhelmingly, for years and years now, been identifying the 2 Antichrists. And no King Charles and no Emmanuel Macron aren't the Antichrists. They are lowercase a Antichrist. They are symbolic of the Antichrist, but they are not the Antichrists. Or any other figure you want to guess at. And when this prediction comes to pass, it will prove everything that I am saying in this video. And please, make no mistake. I know far better than anyone the reason and purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the controversial things that I am saying in this video, including that it is silly to continue playing the Antichrist guessing game. It has been revealed many years ago. In fact, there wouldn't have been a Protestant Reformation had it not been for the knowledge of the first of the two Antichrists, the Pope. Okay. And so, when the prediction comes to pass, it'll prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, and his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections overwhelmingly proves these controversial things that I am saying. And that's case closed. There's no debate about any of the controversial things that I am saying, and I'll point them out to you as I go. And I'll tell you, there's no debate regarding that thing that I'm saying, talking about. It's case closed, no discussion at all, and to not appreciate that is to not appreciate the purpose of this prediction that is from God. And this video and video channel. You might as well turn off the video now. This isn't for you. This is for those who want the truth about things. If you want to continue playing the guessing game, fair enough. You're wasting your time with this channel. See ya. Now, as I was saying, the reason for this ballroom is that it is the 133rd room, which is the 44th semi-prime number, and that's why it is exactly 13 times 3, which hints at 133 months exactly to the day that the 44th president will return to the White House as the Antichrist. That's a stunning thing here. This is the symbolic day of the ballroom here. The other one being the day it was announced, but the demolition began on this day. And demolition is symbolic of destruction. And the purpose of the Antichrist is to destroy America. Well, the primary purpose is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians that haven't already actualized or demonstrated their faith because of their heretical doctrine that they follow, the vast majority of the evangelicals, and also other Protestants and Catholics. Now, this 11, of course, pairs with the 9 months. And that's relevant, as now you know, because Paul Simon's death will point to Revelation 9:11, as I have explained, and why it'll even be a head injury on the state. Okay, now let's see. Now that we've discussed this end of the diagram, let's move back in time here. What we have here is the inauguration of the 44th president. It's broken down into 4 times 4 years plus 9 months. And again, God pairs 9 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections. This 9 months also pairs with the 44th semi-prime number room of the White House. The ballroom, which points to the shining and demonic possession of those who take the mark, which is the thing, the S-H-O-T. And the thing is past tense. It's not a future thing. It will be, but it is also past tense. It did not, as in past tense, require an additional technology to go with it, or a false form of religious worship, or a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is that is in fact judgment for this particular doctrine, which Jesus said he hates, this Nicolaitan doctrine of our day, and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth of those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. Which is why, by the way, Jack Nicholson, who was demonically possessed in the movie, that's a church judgment sign. Jack Nicholson is pointing to the church. There will be quote-unquote Christians, many, many of them, that will become demonically possessed soon. which will be part of the great falling away, the stumbling block. How in the world are these Christians and those that love them, etc., how are they going to put up with this when they see these Christians, quote unquote, demonically possessed? But like I'm saying, it's judgment. They got what they deserved. Now, nowhere in the Bible, by the way, does it say one cannot repent. And I'm not one to say who deserves what or what. I'm just saying that it is judgment, and I know that. And I know why. Because it's the Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war on. What is the Nicolaitan doctrine? Again, the reason for the prediction is to prove what I'm about to say. The Nicolaitan doctrine of our day is specifically Reformed theology. Dispensationalism, which is the package that free grace or cheap grace comes in, and also Reformed and also its cousin sovereign grace, which give us once saved, always saved, and predestination, and our righteousnesses as filthy rags. One verse that Luther took out of context and twisted to support his entire heretical theology and doctrine. Because Luther was an Augustinian monk, and Calvin titled his writings Systematic Augustinianism, and didn't once quote any other early church father and disparaged them, and only quoted Augustine. In other words, the Reformation was a revivification of Augustinianism, and Augustine was a heretical Gnostic auditor. He was an official auditor in the Gnostic Manichaean sect for 9 years before he joined the Catholic Church. Augustine's early writings were all right, but then later he was corrupted by his Gnosticism, which then corrupted the Western Church, ultimately, especially through the Reformation. And one would know these things if they were to take time to read the other early church fathers that Calvin did never quote. And you will clearly see that our, evangelicalism ideas and culture are not what the early church fathers believed, and these were the men who either knew an apostle or knew someone who did. Augustine didn't come till 4 centuries after Jesus. The early church fathers are largely in the first century or two. So, okay, so that's that. Anyway, yeah. And there's much more to say regarding the Nicolaitan doctrine. But before I leave this subject, JFK was assassinated in Dallas because Dallas is also symbolism for this, the capital of evangelicalism. But I'll get to that in a second. Now, if you are a Christian, arguably the most important video for you on this channel is the 23 church signs video. And so I'll refrain from getting into any further into this subject and move on. Make sure you watch the 23 church signs video. All right. Now, so from the, it's also this connection of 4 times 4 years and 9 months. It's also 201 months. And 201 is the 63rd semi-prime number, and God uses this to hint at 3 sixes. In other words, 666. So from the 44th president's inauguration and his arrival to the White House, it is this 666 number of months exactly to the demolition done at the White House to create a ballroom, which is symbolic of demonic possession through the movie The Shining. The Antichrist will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which will facilitate or lead to demonic possession. Now, what we have here is the release of Annie Hall. And that also was pointed to recently with the death of Diane Keaton, and God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is so huge, I haven't even included that in this video here. But she died 9 plus 11 days before this date, which obviously also hints at Revelation 9:11. And it's predicted that Paul Simon will injure his head, which on this day, which will point to Revelation 9:11 and the demonic possession of people who, through their head, who take the mark of the Antichrist. Incidentally, this is one of the 7 trumpet judgments, and the 7 trumpet judgments follow the sound of silence in heaven, which is what Paul Simon is symbolic of in Revelation chapter 8. At the beginning of the chapter, there is a period of sound of silence in heaven, followed then by the 7 trumpet judgments. That's again why Carrie Underwood had a sound of silence at the inauguration, who's known for injuring her head. Again, it was 9 months and 11 days after Paul Simon sang at the White House to the Japanese Prime Minister. Okay, so the 7 trumpet judgments is also why the 7 Psalms album, Paul Simon's most recent album. That's why I haven't finished actually here. That's why Paul Simon's tour for the 7 Psalms album ended in Seattle. On the same day that Trump began demolition for the ballroom, the Seattle Mariners lost their game with a 3-run home run hit by player number 4. They lost the game 3-4, which caused them to lose the series 3-4. That's because it hints at Paul Simon. And his first album, which contains Sound of Silence, which is why it connects to the Sound of Silence sign here. And that album is Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. 3 a.m. is the beginning of the 4th watch of the night in ancient Israel. That gives us 3 and 4. And that points to the Hebrew idiom in the first chapter of the book of Amos that's repeated in the chapter for 3 transgressions and for 4. Paul Simon is Jewish, by the way. For 3 transgressions and for 4 means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been reached, and now judgment is unavoidable and destruction of the nation. It talks about ancient Tyre in that chapter, and ancient Tyre is symbolic of America because its power and prosperity was dependent on its protection by its surrounding ocean. Likewise, God set that up with America. Tyre was known for its ships. America is symbolized by ships in Bible prophecy because the ships of Tarshish in Isaiah chapter 23 refers to Great Britain. There's all kinds of evidence that says that Tarshish was Great Britain, and it's the ships of Tarshish. Well, we know that Great Britain became the dominant empire on which the sun never set through its naval power and its ships. Likewise, America's power is a result of its naval power and its ships and its trade with ships. That's why it's the Seattle Mariners. This Hebrew idiom in the book of Amos is why the first agent to sign Simon and Garfunkel before they produced the Wednesday morning 3 a.m. album, which again is 3 and 4, was Wally Amos, as in walls of security collapsing in God's judgment. Wally Amos lured them into his office with a gift of cookies, and then after went on to found the biggest cookie company in history because it's a prophetic sign from God, Famous Amos Cookies, which hints at the famous prophet Amos. And the first chapter, which has 15 verses, that has this Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4. The first chapter with 15 verses is why Paul Simon had his prophetic dream in which a voice instructed him to make the 7 Psalms album and name it 7 Psalms on the date 115. The 7 Psalms album, and also Graceland, is the 7th solo album of Paul Simon. And also, Paul Simon is known for his hit Late in the Evening, a name in which itself hints at the hour of judgment being late, time's running out for America. And that song is known for its heavy use of trumpets. because trumpets were blown before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment, and also the 7 trumpets of judgment after the sound of silence. It's for 3 transgressions and for 4. And Paul Simon's and Garfunkel's 4th album was Bookends. And it contains the song America. Paul Simon is symbolism for 9/11, which itself is symbolism for Revelation 9/11, because the 4th plane hit the ground at a 40-degree angle into a 40-acre pit 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh and killed 44 people, because the 4th letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. And it is the door that is opened in the 5th trumpet judgment, through which the demons will cross over when it is opened with a key. Music keys. Paul Simon composition, music keys. And so Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism because he opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11, 4 days after 9/11, with the song The Boxer. And boxing is about knocking your opponent out and getting them to collapse onto the ground. 4 days earlier, the Twin Towers were knocked to the ground. Paul Simon also sang at the 10th anniversary memorial at the 9/11 memorial, but also Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the period of warning that God gave on 9/11. The opportunity for America to repent and turn back to God will be symbolically finished when Paul Simon dies. Paul Simon's 4th solo album contains the song Slip, Slide, and Away. America's opportunity to repent and turn back to God has slipped, slidden away, which is why Paul Simon will slip and fall and then die, which will be the bookend to this warning for America, which will mean then that the judgment and destruction are unavoidable, because for 3 transgressions and for 4, the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded, and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. That will be symbolized with Paul Simon's death. That is the meaning here. So back to Annie Hall here. Paul Simon met Shelley Duvall on the set of Annie Hall. Annie Hall itself hints at a large ballroom. Duvall, of course, starred in the movie The Shining about a ballroom. What proves this, too, is that this date that the movie was released is the 110th day of the year. 110 stories fell on 9/11, and it was exactly 381 months before the Antichrist arrived at the White House. 381 is the 119th semi-prime number, which hints at 9/11. The day on which 110 stories collapsed. 2 of them, we have 22 years here. 22 years, though, is the number that God uses to symbolize the mark of the Antichrist in his signs. The inverse of the mark of the Antichrist described in the book of Ezekiel would have been a Tav mark. The Tav letter is the last and 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible, which is the 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes, which is why they are marked. Chromosomes come with 2 arms, and they come in pairs, 2 and 2, 22. Exactly 22 years after the release of Annie Hall, where Simon and Duvall met, which gives us The Shining, because she starred in The Shining, and Paul Simon sang the Mississippi Delta was shining like a national guitar. That gets us to this date here, the first symbolic beginning of the mass school shootings, which have been prophetic and symbolic of 2 things. First, the school shootings have been judgment by God on the parents who condone the murder of other people's unborn babies. That's why their kids are murdered in the schools. It's not a coincidence that this Columbine shooting occurred at the beginning of the peak of the baby boomers' kids in high school. And that is because abortions were legalized for baby boomers. That's why also in the 2000s, the school shootings moved into the universities, because that's the bulk of the baby boomers' kids when they were in universities, the millennial generation. In the shooting, there were 4 times 4 deaths, which hints at the 44th president, Antichrist. It was again on the 110th day of the year, and it was in 99, and 99 is 9 times 11, which hints at Revelation 9:11, and also on 9/11, 110 stories collapsed. This is exactly 117 months to the inauguration of the president, the 44th president, after the 4 times 4 deaths. That's because 117 is very prophetic. It is 9 times 13 for one thing. 9 symbolizes God's judgment and God's signs. It's from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. 13 symbolizes the Antichrist in the Bible and also the mark of the Antichrist. But also, more important, well, equally important, 117 is equal to, in Hebrew gematria, the phrase, let it divide, in Hebrew, which is the repeating phrase in the first chapter of Genesis. Let it divide. This is because God's prerogative, his whole design here, this life, this planet, this plan, this creation, is for the purposes of God dividing, which is why Jesus said, do not think that I have come to bring peace and unity. I came to bring division and the sword. God's prerogative is to divide people into the sheep and the goats, which is contrary to the New Age philosophy, the people who call themselves, quote unquote, spiritual. It's the exact opposite, because the quote unquote spiritual people are in truth followers of Satan. And I know the reason for the purpose of this prediction. It is to prove what I have just said. It is time to wake up. The reason why you don't like this is because, why? It's the reason why Jesus said, blessed is he who is not offended by me. You do not like the idea of judgment, and you do not like the idea of division, and you do not like the idea of sin. That's why in your religion, the New Age religion, the quote-unquote spiritual religion, sin is an anathema. To think of such a thing is like the enemy. That's your Satan. People who talk about sin and judgment are your Satan. Well, one of us is correct, and the other is wrong. And because you think you know Jesus, and because you think you are a follower of Jesus, doesn't make you one. You have no idea who Jesus is. You probably haven't read the Bible. You've just heard about Jesus being love and God being love. And that's why you are fooled. That's why you are deceived. God's love for people is rarely mentioned in the Bible, and the few times that it is, it's always in context of his redeemed. It isn't true that God loves everyone. That's not the Bible. God hates sin, and he is angry with sinners. And that's the truth. And there needs to be a solution to this problem of sin, which leads to death. The wages of sin is death, as it says in the Bible. This is why we die. We cannot live forever and be in heaven, therefore, in our current condition. It wouldn't be heaven otherwise. What makes this place not heaven and hellish are the people in it, the unregenerated sinners. And Satan's power, the ruler of this world, as the Bible says, is Satan's power over us is death. And so there's a problem here. God also needed this world, this environment, and contrast between righteousness and unrighteousness in order to provide an opportunity for us to choose with our free will, which is what makes us in the image of God, the difference, to choose between righteousness and unrighteousness, and to choose between a division between whether or not they want to be with God forever and follow his ways or not. Whether they want to learn about his ways and submit to them or not. The original sin in the Bible is independence from God, which is exactly what these quote-unquote spiritual people are. Rebelling against God, independent from God. They're not interested in the authority of God that comes through the Bible. They're not interested in learning how the Bible is actually true. And why? Essentially, they detest this idea of judgment and sin. That's the thing. But that's the thing. That's why. That's the whole point. That's why you are deceived. That's why you are going to hell. You are going to hell. I don't care what you say that you love Jesus or you love God. And it doesn't matter about your so-called spiritual experiences that you've had. The devil works spiritual experiences for people that ask for them. For example, Catholics are constantly having spiritual experiences that confirm for them their Catholicism, which God absolutely hates. The thing that God hates the most in the Bible is false religion. And the Jews, when they mixed the true religion with the pagan religion of their neighbors, which is exactly what Catholicism is. Because when Rome converted, it didn't do away with its pagan religion, it just repackaged it and to make it look like Christianity. And God hates this. And God hates the quote-unquote spiritual religion people and their religion. He doesn't necessarily hate them, but the problem is, God is good. And because he is good, sin must be paid for. There must be justice. If there weren't justice, God would not be good. So sin needs to be paid for, and that comes in the form of death. So that's a big problem. What are we to do about this? Because God needed this in the first place in order to give us the choice, because God's design, his purpose is to create a creature that would love him, but no one wants to marry someone who's forced to love them and be with them forever. No one wants to marry a robot or an arranged marriage, like, if you will. God wants to provide a choice for us. That's why when he created us, he didn't step in front of us and say, hey, welcome to life. I'm God. Love me. It needs to be done by free will, but to do that required this choice between good and bad. But that leads to sin, which is a necessary part of God's plan, as I'm describing here. But the problem is sin must be overcome, because the consequences of sin must be paid for. You must go to hell and pay for your sin. You know, Hitler doesn't get off the hook. That's ridiculous. Now, having said that, what's also ridiculous are the Christians that say people will be tortured in hell forever. Well, obviously that does not make a good God either, and that's not the Bible. The Bible speaks of a second death and the annihilation of those after they have paid for their sin. So the problem is this, death, so it must be overcome. And so God needed a solution to overcome death. We needed to have an immortal man. But a man couldn't do it. But it also wouldn't have been appropriate for God to do it. He can't do it either. It needs to be a man. A mortal man needs to overcome death. That's why the first immortal man is Jesus. But God, to do this, needed to be Jesus. He became a man in order to live a life and then die and then overcome death through his resurrection. And through this, we can follow Jesus through his Spirit. When we get transformed through his Spirit, we can be regenerated and be cleaned of our sin. And when we follow the teachings of Jesus and do what we can with the bags of gold we have been given, which represent our opportunities and abilities. Because there are two parts to salvation. One, Abraham was deemed righteous after believing God's promise and trusting in him. But 2, faith is a doing, as James clearly describes in chapter 2, and uses the example of Abraham and Rahab to say, for example, you see, a person is not saved by faith alone, but through his works, which is the only place in the Bible where the phrase saved by faith alone occurs. Because there is a second part, which is why after Abraham believed, God called him to demonstrate his faith through the request to sacrifice his only son Isaac. And right before doing so, God sent the angel to tell Abraham to stop. Don't harm the boy, for now I know that you fear me. You see, God didn't know prior that Abraham feared him, and neither did Abraham. And Abraham demonstrated and actualized his faith through his works, if you will, his deeds, his actions. This demonstration of faith typically requires some form of risk and or sacrifice. And there are many, the majority even, of Christians that have not yet demonstrated their faith, which is the reason and purpose for the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist, which Bible prophecy says if one takes, they will go to hell. Now I'm also explaining the Bible prophecy also says these people will become demonically possessed. That is what's being described in the 5th trumpet judgment, which is the whole purpose of the sign here with Paul Simon. This is another reason why the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22. It's this second part, which is described in Genesis chapter 22, when God learned that Abraham feared him. Because God is looking for those who fear him, and it is only those who fear him that will stop sinning. One can say they love God, but unless they fear him, they've not changed. This is a necessary part. It's a loving fear. It's the same as the fear of a child's father. The mother will say, wait till your father gets home, and that child should be scared. And if he isn't, there's something wrong. But does that child not love his father? Well, of course not. Of course he still loves his father, but he fears him too. And that's what's missing for a lot of Christians, because they're even told through their quote-unquote pastors and their doctrine that that's Old Testament stuff, we don't need to fear God anymore, etc. And this is a message to the quote-unquote spiritual people, because fear, losing fear, is like the goal of their religion. It's the exact opposite. It's the literal opposite of Christianity, which is why it's from Satan. The New Ager or the spiritual person will be listening to this. They're like, wow, they've never even thought of such a thing, that it's important to fear God. It's like the opposite for them. The whole religion basically is about not fearing things. That's why the near-death experiences in which the people come back and espouse New Age or spiritual religion. Well, I'll give you an example. Eben Alexander, the famous neurosurgeon who was an atheist but then came back from his near-death experience and became a full-time New Age lecturer and author of books and guest on Oprah Winfrey, etc. He says, essentially, the angel, the female angel, and that's a red flag because there are no female angels in the Bible. There's no reproduction. There's no female angels. But he says, and it's always the female angel that visits these New Agers in the near-death experience. It's never a male angel. There's a reason for that. But it's the female angel that comes to him, and he says that the message that he was given by the angel that he was supposed to bring back to the world can be boiled down to 2 things. One, you have nothing to fear. And because death is just a part of the reincarnation process, and whatever you don't get right in this life, you'll get right in the next life, which is absurd. There's no such thing as reincarnation, and the kids that are under 4 years old that think they have had some things and are able to say some profound things are simply experiencing demons because people get the deception they're asking for, the adults in this case. And also, the message is, the number 2 message is, you can do no wrong. Again, because life is a classroom and you're just here to get a learning experience, and whatever you don't get right this time, you'll get right the next time, etc. Well, these are the exact 2 opposite things of Christianity, which is why the quote-unquote spiritual people are against Christians, even though they might say in the same breath that they love Jesus or whatever. They have no idea who Jesus is, though. It's the same as the Muslims. They have their idea of Jesus, as do the Hindus, but it has nothing to do with the biblical Jesus, and therefore has nothing to do with Jesus. Just because you put the name Jesus on something doesn't mean that you know Jesus. Anyway, the spiritual people say they know Jesus, but they're against Christianity because that's what they believe. And so their beliefs are the exact opposites, the 2 things, as Eben Alexander explains. Fear is the enemy for them, whereas in Christianity, one needs to fear God, is the goal. It's the exact opposite. You can do no wrong. Well, in Christianity, yes, you can do wrong. In fact, it's called sin, and that's why you die, and you will go to hell to pay for it. It's the exact opposite. Okay, so it's time to wake up if you're a quote-unquote spiritual person. And I've just explained to you now the near-death experiences. There's no reason for you to continue with this nonsense. Open a Bible and start becoming a Christian. Okay, so this division, we got off on the subject of division here with this 117 months. The middle dividing chapter of the Bible is Psalms 117. Again, the phrase let it divide is equal to 117. Also, the dividing year of the Roman Empire, the seat of the Antichrist, is 117 AD, the year of its maximum geography expansion and then beginning of contraction. Also, the eclipse that went over America in 2017 that divided America down the middle and peaked over the middle of the country, in the middle of the path of the eclipse, peaked over St. Louis at 1:17 p.m. And St. Louis is known for its gateway arch, which is symbolic of a portal through which the demons will cross through and demonically possess people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. Okay. So we have the Shelley Duvall, Paul Simon. They met on the set of Annie Hall. Okay, and then Duvall went on to film The Shining, and Simon went on to sing The Mississippi Delta is Shining Like a National Guitar. Well, this day was exactly 81 days, which is 9 times 9 days, after this date. Now we're going to get into a new subject here. Okay, so first of all, though, the 9 times 9 days here is relevant because, well, the number 9 is the most important number in God's signs. It's from the Bible. It symbolizes God's judgment. But it also connects with this 9 days right here. But also, 81 days is also a 9/11 number because 9 divided by 11 is equal to 0.8181 into infinity. Also, on the first plane that struck the tower, Flight 11, that had a crew of 11 people, and the second plane had a crew of 9 people, that plane had 81 passengers. So 81 is, well, 8 plus 1 is 9. It had a crew of 11 and had 8 plus 1, or 81. But it's also a multiple of 9. In fact, it's 9 times 9, which also pairs with the 11 crew. Okay, so that's why this is relevant. Now, what happened on this date, January 28th, 1977, was that there was this famous TV show, Chico and the Man. It starred an actor named Scatman Crothers. He is the guy that plays, forget his name now, in the movie The Shining, the older black gentleman who is the caretaker but goes away to Florida for the winter while the Jack Nicholson's family takes over for the winter. So, if you recall the movie. So that his name in life is Scatman Crothers. It was a nickname. I forget his real name now. Scatman Crothers, okay? So he starred in this TV show in the late 70s, okay? And he starred in it for 4 seasons, which gives us prophecy here, because it's the number 4 that symbolizes Simon and the door that's opened, as I explained earlier. Hebrew letter, the 4th Hebrew letter is the symbol for a door, through which the demons come through and demonically possess. Furthermore, there is a very famous door, come to think of it. I just thought of this. It's amazing what comes to you when you make the videos. The door in the movie, The Shining. A big part of the plot of the movie, The Shining, is the door to room 237. Wow. And since we're on the subject of that door, Danny is riding around the hallways of the corridors of the hotel and rides past room 237 and stops, but he's wearing a sweater that's Apollo 11. He's wearing an Apollo 11 sweater. And that's because on this date, Paul Simon sang about Apollo 11, as I'll explain. So, let's see. So Scatman Crothers, well, let's see. So the door, right. And so he started in this show that went for 4 seasons as this character named Louis. And God is using these names, Louis, to hint at St. Louis and the portal that's there, the gateway to the west, the Gateway Arch, which incidentally is there as in commemoration of Lewis and Clark's expedition. It's one of these symbolic foundings of America things, too, demonstrating God's hand on American history. So Louis started for 4 seasons. That's prophetic because it's St. Louis and portal, door. Okay, now, the thing about this show that's famous, well, first of all, it was inspired by Cheech and Chong, who are known for smoking marijuana and getting high, which is symbolic of demonic possession. So the show is named Chico and the Man. Chico is a word in Portuguese, as in Portugal, that means Francisco. It's a nickname for Francisco. God is using Francisco and San Francisco to reveal the identity of the first of 2 antichrists, Pope Francis. But Chico also hints at Chicago. And God is using Chicago to hint at the second of the 2 antichrists. So we have this both identities of the Antichrist contained in this name Chico. But it's also Chico the Man. And one of the titles of the Antichrist in the Bible is the Man of Sin. Now, this season, in its 3rd of 4 seasons, which hints at Paul Simon, 3 and 4, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., for 3 transgressions and for 4. The 3rd of 4 seasons is when one of the 2 main characters, in other words, Chico, shot himself in real life at the age of 22. What's his first name? The guy who shot himself is Freddie Prinz, which hints at Paul Simon, whose middle name is Frederick. So Freddie Prinz shot himself, and it was the 3rd season at the age of 22, which hints at Genesis 3:22, which is the passage that God is using to symbolize what we're talking about here. It symbolizes the lie at the beginning of the age told to Eve in the Garden of Eden, that she shall surely not die, which is the same lie that will be told at the end of the age soon to those seeking immortality, and it's promised to be delivered to them through this mark of the Antichrist. And this promise for this technology, this transhumanism technology will also be promised by the demons that will come through pretending to be aliens. Which is why, coming back here, the Seattle Mariners lost here, and why Simon's tour for 7 Psalms ended in Seattle, is because Seattle and where the Mariners play baseball is near the Space Needle. Space being symbolic of the transhumanism technology and the aliens that will promote it. The needle being symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. Elvis popularized things, SHOTs, for the baby boomer generation when he took the polio thing before he went on stage at the Ed Sullivan Show. Had it not been for that, whole history would have been entirely different. Elvis, the king of rock, as in King Antichrist, took the thing, and he also went to the Space Needle. He went to Seattle to film the movie It Happened at the World's Fair. And the Space Needle was built for the World's Fair. And of course, Elvis went in the year that the World's Fair opened. Of course, it only runs for 1 year anyway. And so that's a connection between the thing, because Elvis is symbolism for the SHOTs. That's what I forgot to mention here. The mass shootings are not only just, the school shootings are judgment for the condoning of other people's unborn babies, and that's why their kids are murdered in the schools, but also mass shootings in general are symbolic of the masses taking the mark of the Antichrist, the deadly thing, the deadly SHOT. The things that come out of guns and go into people are symbolic of the things that come out of things and things go into people. And so that's why Chico shot himself, because it's symbolic of the thing that will promise immortality, and it's symbolized by Revelation 3:22, which is why he shot himself in the 3rd season at the age of 22. And why he starred with Scatman, who starred in the movie The Shining about demonic possession. And why he starred in the movie in this show for 4 seasons. Now, the day he shot himself was this date. He died the next day, the 29th. January 29th, 129 hints at G129, which is the Greek word in the concordance that means blood, which is, of course, what's polluted with when one takes the thing. It's inserted into a person's blood. Now, he shot himself just after taping of an episode. The episode that was taped that day was Ed Talks to God. The other character, the man, by the way, it's 2 characters, which hints at the 2 antichrists, Pope Francis and the president from Chicago, which is why Chico means Francisco and Chicago. But the name of the episode after which the guy shot himself was Ed Talks to God. Stunning. Now, in this show, the man character, Ed, called himself a Hungarican. He was really German, but he decided that it would be good and funny to be a Hungarian American in order so that he could call himself a Hungarican. But what this does prophetically is communicate that Americans will become hungry in the end times, because this is how the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced, as is described in Bible prophecy. There will be a restriction on the ability to buy and sell food for those who don't or refuse to take the mark of the Antichrist. They will not be able to buy the rationed food. They'll only give the food to the quote-unquote good citizens that deserve it, the ones that cooperate. You have to be able to take the mark to be able to buy and sell food. But again, taking the mark is an abomination, and you will go to hell. But the Antichrist will enforce it through the restriction of buying and selling food, which is a form of genocide, a politicide, which clearly that's where we're headed. If you look up on the internet, the 10 stages of genocide, the left is currently in the middle stages of perpetrating its genocide on true conservatives and true Christians. It's clear. And again, the reason for this prediction in this video is to prove the controversial things that I am saying. It's a fact. Everything that I'm saying that's controversial is a fact. It's not up for debate. That's what's going to happen. That is what's happening. This is proven overwhelmingly. I don't have time to explain all of these things through the myriad of prophetic signs that confirm all of this in the big picture of science. The prediction will prove that this is God's true big picture of science. That's it. That's all you need. I have the authority to say these things, in other words. Okay, so now this date itself hints at this coming rationing of food, because exactly 4 plus 4 years later was the day, the prophetic day, that the leaders of the pop world music scene got into one studio together miraculously, because they all have big egos, and sang this and recorded this song, We Are the World, on January 28th, 1985. The We Are the World effort was for food relief for the starvation in Ethiopia. That's why this is symbolism. 4 plus 4 years obviously hints at the 44th president, who will take control of the food supply. As did Augustus Caesar in the year 22 BC, hence the number 22 being symbolic of the mark. It's also symbolic of the taking control of the food supply through Augustus Caesar, who was the nephew of Julius Caesar, who was assassinated in 44 BC, which sparked the Civil War, which is what we're going through right now. And the 44th president being the leader of the one side, the side that is also in league with Satan, because it is a spiritual civil war. The two sides cannot live together anymore. It's not like the Civil War that was basically a civil war during the time of Roosevelt, during the Depression, or the Civil War in the 1800s, or the Revolutionary War, which was also a civil war. There were the Loyalists, and they went to Canada. That was a civil war. But unlike those civil wars, our current civil war is divided into two people that have absolutely nothing in common. They absolutely agree on nothing at all that is important. Back then, the two sides were both still Christians, and they agreed on fundamental things. That isn't the case today. It is a religious war today, and religion is the biggest factor in a culture and civilization. We have a split in the civilization that can't be reconciled unless one side joins the religion of the other. But these people that are in spiritual rebellion against God will never do that. And that's why they are against the other side, because they are in spiritual rebellion against God. It is a different type of civil war. It is a spiritual civil war. It is a religious war, but it is a spiritual war. It is a war between good and bad, and right and wrong, and unrighteous and righteous, essentially. I'm not saying that everyone on the right or left is in either completely 100% either or, but God is in the process of dividing the gray into black and white. And those that are conservatives are waking up and becoming more and more. You can see this happening. There are people that weren't religious, weren't into Christ, weren't into the Bible, weren't into God, that have become so in the last few years. Likewise, there have been others on the other side that have become more and more unrighteous and more cult-like and more satanic. God is in the process of making the white whiter and the black blacker in this spiritual war. It's a division, again. God's prerogative is to divide. And the big divisive thing is the mark of the Antichrist, symbolic of all of this. It's just symbolism. The mark is symbolism. It's, of course, literally an abomination, but it is also symbolism. Anyway, it's the 44th president that will enforce the mark through the food supply, which is why we have this connection to We Are the World. But it was for food relief to Ethiopia, and that's because in the Greek concordance, the G128th word, as in the date 128 here, is the word for the Ethiopian, which identifies Barack Obama, who was born in East Africa, right near Ethiopia. He was born in southwest Kenya. That's why Barack Obama was born exactly 128 weeks before the birth of Michelle Obama, for example. There are many other confirmations for these things. Like I'm saying, there is the case with all of these things that are controversial that I am saying. And one of the controversial things is that Barack Obama was born in East Africa, but that's a fact. The prediction will prove this. That's the purpose of this prediction. If you don't appreciate that, turn the channel off right now. You're wasting your time. Now, as I said earlier, God pairs 44 and 9 together to confirm the signs and connections. This 4 plus 4 years exact connection confirms this 9-day connection and vice versa. Well, this 9-day connection gets us to an 11. Because this was the day that Paul Simon sang at Jimmy Carter's pre-inaugural ball. And Jimmy Carter was the 39th president, and 39 is 13 times 3. And I just realized that just now. This whole diagram connects back to this 13 times 3 months here from the demolition for the 133rd room. And it begins with Paul Simon on the date that hints at 9/11 and Revelation 9/11, this 119 date, when he sang at the inauguration for the 13 times 3 president. He sang his song American Tune, which is in itself a warning of judgment from God. It is a melancholy song, and it is about how the good times have passed away. And in the song, Simon references the Mayflower and Apollo 11. The Mayflower anchored on the date 11/11. It took the 11th triangular number of days to cross the ocean, and that was far longer than it was supposed to because they encountered a storm that blew them off course and caused them to land in Massachusetts instead of Virginia, which enabled them to survive because had they gone to Virginia, they wouldn't have. And the Cape Cod geography, which is where they anchored, is a giant fishhook, which is why their crossing was symbolic of the beginning of the age, or rather the age of fishing for men, because God used the UK, America, and Australia and Canada to spread the gospel around the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. But primarily America, God's Christian disciples nation, which is why they landed on Plymouth Rock, because rock is symbolism for Jesus in the Bible, and on and on. But it was 101 passengers, and that hints at 11, as does Apollo 11. And also 10 years later was John Winthrop's 11 ship flotilla. And before they departed the ships, John Winthrop delivered a sermon that was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28 regarding the promises of blessings and curses for the Israelites before they crossed the Jordan River into the promised land after they escaped the religious persecution from the king of Egypt. And the pilgrims were escaping religious persecution from the king of England, from the Church of England, which was essentially the same thing as the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church and the Church of England are not Christianity, or they're not the Bible. And it was religious persecution, and they escaped it, crossed the Atlantic, and they saw their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous to the Israelites crossing of the Jordan River into the promised land. They crossed the Atlantic to their promised land and founded the nation for God. There are only 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God and the Bible: Israel and America. Also, Governor Winthrop, his speech derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28 also describes 9/11. For example, it talks about an eagle swooping down, and on the Flight 11 plane wing or tail was a giant eagle painted on it. And also Deuteronomy chapter 28 talks about the Israelites walking on iron under a bronze sky. And that's exactly what happened on 9/11. They were walking on iron, and the sky was literally bronze colored. But also, Winthrop lived on Governor's Island, the first governor of Massachusetts, and that's from where the flights originated. Logan Airport on Governor's Island, it was Flight 11, as in John Winthrop's 11-ship flotilla. The reason for the 11s is because of the promises of blessings and curses being a reflection, and if God were to symbolize a reflection through a number, it would be the number 11, the 1 and the 1. And it was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 that flew into the Twin Towers. It looked like a giant 11. In New York State, the 11th state in New York City has 11 letters because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. And in English is an idiom that means last chance, time is running out for America to repent and turn back to God, which is why 4 days later, Paul Simon sang, and then his bookend death will be the symbolic end of this period of warning for America to repent and turn back to God. Which is why we have this 11 days connection down here. Apollo 11, because Apollo 7 was the first landing on the moon, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus, and moon is a giant rock. Also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. And in the Bible, watching for the timing of the moon is symbolic of timing, watching for the timing of the Lord's return through prophetic signs, including moon signs. And so Apollo 11 also leads to Apollo 17, the last time that an American was on the moon, which was symbolic of America's departure from Christ. And the word to depart or to step off is the 576th word in the Greek concordance, which is why exactly 576 months after the last departure from the moon was the first taking of the thing, the SHOT, on December 14th, 2020. The reason for Apollo 17 is why the two space shuttle disasters for NASA were exactly 17 years apart, essentially. They're commemorated on the same day of the year. And that's why the two planes that struck the two towers on 9/11 were 17 minutes apart. It all points back to Apollo 17 and America's departure from the moon, which Paul Simon sang about on this date that hints at 9/11, the two planes that struck 17 minutes apart, Apollo 17. And this Apollo 11 singing about is 9 days before this Chico and the man sign, as I just explained, which connects to all of this. Okay, so now we've established this first diagram here. We've explained it all now. All right, so now this bottom diagram here, a couple of days after Trump began demolition on the ballroom, was the death of Dave Ball. All right, since the creation of this diagram here, it has been learned that there was a Trump ballroom prophetic sign on this date, in addition to this death of Dave Ball, which I'll explain in a second. The Trump sign on this day was him hosting the donors. The news story of this day regarding the ballroom and Trump was that on this night, he hosted the donors who are privately donating funds to construct the ballroom. This was the 22nd of the month, and at the top of this list of donors is YouTube. And they are donating $22 million. So it was the 22nd of the month. The list was actually released the following day, but the event, the dinner that Trump hosted for these donors was on the 22nd, and in the news stories, the top donor is YouTube, which donated $22 million, which is prophetic because the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist. Did I mention that already in this video? Well, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Ezekiel, and it would have been a Tav mark, which is the last and 22nd letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist alters a person's chromosomes, and a chromosome comes in with two arms, and they come in pairs, so 2 and 2. Well, the lawsuit, which is part of the story, and the significance of YouTube donating $22 million, is that Trump sued YouTube after they cancel cultured him after the 6th day of the first month protest, which was exactly 222 weeks after the release, if you will, or the airing of the documentary Night of the Living Steelers. And that documentary was made by the same movie maker, same director as the movie Night of the Living Dead, which was the pioneering zombie movie. The name of the man is Roman something or something Roman, I forget. Famous director who is famously broke, even though he made the most famous zombie movie of all time, arguably. But anyway, so let me just check his name. Yeah, his name is George Romero, okay? Anyway, he also produced this documentary in 2016, Night of the Living Steelers. And that's because he's from Pittsburgh, which is where Night of the Living Dead is filmed also, near Pittsburgh. Incidentally, that's also a hint at how the fourth plane on 9/11 crashed near Pittsburgh in a farm area, just like the movie. And the the fourth plane that crashed at a 40-degree angle and created a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, and killed 44 people. Because the number 4, as I have explained, I think already in this video, is what I've said already. It's symbolism for the door through which the demonic or the demons will come through and possess people, and which will make them zombies. So it's not, in other words, it's not a coincidence. All of this is by God's design. The most famous pioneering zombie movie is filmed outside of Pittsburgh in a farming area, which is where the plane crashed. And the planes crashed, the fourth one that crashed at a 40-degree angle into a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, that killed 44 people, is for the purpose of pointing to the door that will open with the key that's described in Revelation 9:11, or symbolized by Revelation 9:11. And so we have the zombie connection, in other words, because that's what will happen to these people who have taken the mark of the Antichrist. They will become, as God is communicating through his signs, and this is just scratching the surface, zombies. They will become zombies. There's the zombie theme in God's signs, in other words. And it carries over into the 6th day of the first month, because if we think about it, it was a zombie movie. We had the security barrier, typical of zombie movies, including Night of the Living Dead, where the zombies, the zombie-like masses are crashing through the security barrier, infiltrating the residence or the home or the building or whatever, where the people are, that are attempting to be safe from the masses of zombies. So it was akin to a zombie movie, the events of the 6th day of the first month. And the reason for the 222 months exact connection from the 6th day of the first month back to, I think it was October 16th, or maybe October 5th or 6th or something in 2016, when this George Romero director released another documentary, Night of the Living Steelers. Now, the reason for that is because he's from Pittsburgh, which is where the Steelers play, the football team, and he directed the most famous zombie movie of history, but also he caught footage at the time. He was hired by the Steelers to film the game, which ended up catching, or no pun intended, but the most famous catch in football history, nicknamed the Immaculate Reception, which was during a playoff game at the final play of the game, in which the quarterback for the Steelers threw the ball, which ricocheted off the helmet of the opponent and high up into the air, and then was caught by Franco Harris, who then ran the ball into the end zone to win the game. And so that's the most famous catch in football history. It's called the Immaculate Reception, as a play on the Immaculate Conception. But it was captured by George Romero because he was hired at the time to film the game. And so later, years later, he ended up producing this documentary with the players, much later in life, talking about this day and this event and this catch, etc. So anyway, that day of the release of this documentary, Night of the Living Steelers, which is a play on his movie Night of the Living Dead, is exactly 222 weeks before the 6th day of the first month, zombie-like crashing of the security barrier. Okay, and 222 because, again, the number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. And it is the mark of the Antichrist that will lead to demonic possession and zombies. That's why that connection. And as a result of the 6th day of the first month, YouTube cancel cultured, which is all part of this zombie-like hysteria of the masses, Trump. And that's why, because of the lawsuit, well, so is implied by the article, it's not necessarily true, but YouTube is now donating $22 million to the ballroom. And this video is explaining how the ballroom hints at the Shining movie, which is symbolic of demonic possession. Or the movie is about demonic possession. Okay, so that's part of what happened here on October 22nd, the 22nd of the month, no less. Oh, you know what, too? 10 and 22 hint at 122, which is the 41st, which is the 41st semi-prime number, a number that is only divisible by two other prime numbers, which is something God uses. And again, well, not again, because it'll be explained in a second, this is exactly 41 months to this date here, which I'll explain in a second. But again, Paul Simon was born in 41, and 41 is equal to the word key in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and it is a key that will open the door to the bottomless pit, as in the connection to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh yes, and before I forget, importantly, of course, Night of the Living Steelers is a communication from God to prove for those that for some reason, well, we know the reason, for those who have been brainwashed, in other words, for those who are zombie-like, who don't know that the referendum was shoplifted. The reason why you don't know the referendum was shoplifted is because you've been brainwashed, but why have you been brainwashed? Well, ultimately it's spiritual. You're not interested in truth, justice, and righteousness. You're interested in the lies, and you love the lies. Why is that? It's spiritually because you love being with Satan. You are in rebellion against God. I mean, it's hard to describe. You might think of yourself as a good person, but no one is, as Jesus said, but it's not true. You aren't a good person. You love these lies. And it's hard for you to see it, but the reason why you love the lies is because you aren't in favor of God. You do not like the idea that the God of the Bible is the true God. That is not, for some it's icky, but for some it's disgusting for them. They hate this God. They hate this God of the Bible. They don't like it. They don't like how people are judged, for example, based on their sin. They don't like, anyway, you get my point. And so that's enough of that, actually. That's just interesting that I just noticed this, though. This date also hints at this 41 months connection here. And ultimately Paul Simon, too, because of him being born in the year 41. But we have the connection back to the zombies. That's astounding, because that's what we're talking about here. This demonic possession that's leading to a zombie pandemic. Okay, Dave Ball was half of the duo that was the famous pop band Soft Cell, whose big hit was Tainted Love. Okay, but Dave Ball hints at the ballroom, and now we know the ballroom is symbolism for demonic possession. Dave Ball died at the age of 66, which not only hints at the Antichrist 666, but is 3 times 22, which hints at Genesis 3:22, which, as I explained, is symbolic of the demonic possession and the promise of immortality through the mark of the Antichrist, Genesis 3:22. Now, on this same day, forward, which hints at 4, as in the door, the demons will pass through, recalled 1.44 million of its vehicles, which is prophetic, because this is the number that's important in the book of Revelation, 144, which is symbolic of those who will be rescued from the persecution from the Antichrist and the mark, which again is what is symbolized through Dave Ball because of ballroom. The mark is the SHOT that inserts things into a person's blood and into their cells, which is why the name of their band was Soft Cell. As in soft cell, as in the components of the SHOTs easily getting inside the barrier of the cell that's soft. I mean, what a strange name, but it's prophetic. And it's tainted love, as in the tainted blood of people that take the mark. Now, interestingly, the song ends with a cover of Diana Ross's Supremes, as in the Supreme Being, Where Did Our Love Go? Well, this is prophetic, and it hints at or symbolizes the love relationship between God and his Gentile nation, America. Where did the love go? Where did our love go, God is saying here. In other words, it's judgment destruction time. Where did our love go? America no longer loves God. Okay, and like I said, the quote-unquote spiritual people that think they love God, they don't. And there are also, a lot of lost evangelicals. God is communicating through his signs. The main theme of God's signs, in fact, is judgment warning for the church. Because God is very, very displeased with the church, the specifically American evangelical church. Because God reproves whom he loves. Okay, so don't give me America as a Christian nation. The church itself is lost, but that's obviously become a minority now, especially in the blue states. And so where did our love go? Okay, and so the tainted love is yeah, okay. So what I forgot to add here, though, is that there was a Diana Ross sign on August 12th. This was when she unexpectedly announced that for unknown reasons she couldn't perform basically the inauguration of this brand new Royal Caribbean ship. And this was one of a number of ship signs, including a number of Royal Caribbean cruise ship signs that God demonstrated beginning in the month of August because of the ships that are described in the 8th chapter of Revelation, August being the 8th month. And the signs involving the ships began on the date 8/8, and it's in Revelation 8:8, in which the ships are described, which again, as I explained, are symbolic of America, hence the mariners sign right here, like I explained. And so anyway, and all hints at Simon ultimately too, because of the sound of silence at the beginning of this chapter that precedes the destruction of the ships. And so this August 12th Diana Ross sign, which I forgot to put here, is 71 days to this date. 71 is the 9 plus 11th prime number, which is at Revelation 9:11. which is exactly what we're talking about here with the ballroom and tainted love, right? Soft cell. The mark demonically possessing people with the components through into the brain cells or in the cells of the people. Okay, so, but Diana Ross is known for being from the Supremes and Motown Records, Detroit, which is why the connection to the Ford sign, the 4. Because the door, the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet being the door, right? And the door being the vehicle, if you will, that the demons will cross through from the bottomless pit. But it's the 1.44 million. But this is to confirm the connection to Diana Ross, which in itself is a part of the connections that confirm to Paul Simon. Because Paul Simon and Diana Ross are also a parallel in God's signs. Very, very important, because Diana Ross also symbolizes 9/11. That's why this 20th prime number of days, 20 being 9 plus 11. 71 days, 20th prime number, 9 plus 11. Diana Ross, like Paul Simon, again, Paul Simon saying 4 days after 9/11, in the opening of the first broadcast after 9/11 of Saturday Night Live, and saying at the 9/11 memorial 10 years later, but also Diana Ross sang the first, or performed at the first Major League Sports event in New York City after 9/11. But to further confirm the significance of that, she was in New York City, and after 9/11 famously drove across the country because there were no flights to be with her family in Los Angeles, and then returned to New York City to perform the first sports game, which was the New York Mets baseball game, and that also was prophetic. And I forget the details, but it also confirms all of this. There was, in other words, I'm sure more 9/11 in that game. And I made a video about that way back in mid-August after this sign here on August 12th. Okay, so Diana Ross also symbolizes 9/11 because she performed the first, because God uses firsts for signs. Like Paul Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live, she performed at the first sports game after 9/11 in New York City. Okay? In other words, Revelation 9/11. And again, on 9/11, the 4th plane hit the ground at a 40-degree angle and created a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh, and killed 44 people, because the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the door, and that's why the Ford vehicles in Detroit being recalled because of Motown and Diana Ross. In other words, this Diana Ross sign on August 12th with the Royal Caribbean ship wasn't complete until this connection, which in turn connects with 9 days to the date it's predicted that Paul Simon will die from a head injury, and is also 4 times 4 days to the date he's predicted to die from his head injury. That's a pairing of 9 and 4, as I explained, confirms the signs. This 9 days and 4 times 4 days also pairs with the 23 months here. Because this sign here of Dave Ball and the Ford vehicles was exactly 23 months after the vehicle crashed in a suicidal way into the U.S. Customs after it jumped into the air and became airborne and went into a fiery crash at the Rainbow Bridge that cost $4 million. Bridge is the same symbolism as a door in God's signs. That's why it's astounding that it cost $4 million. It's also the Rainbow Bridge. The rainbow is God's sign regarding judgment in the Bible. And Paul Simon, of course, has a big hit, Bridge Over Troubled Water. This bridge goes over the Niagara River and Niagara Falls. That's definitely troubled water, or symbolism for it anyway. It's also symbolism for the book of Genesis and the ark and the flood, because the historic barge that's stuck on the river at the precipice of the falls for over 100 years is symbolic of Noah's ark, because the most dramatic rescue in Niagara Falls history was the 2 men trapped on the barge in 1918, the year of the flu that's named after people from Spain, which is symbolic of the CVD disease, which gave us the mark of the Antichrist. This bridge, by the way, was shut down during the CVD hysteria. Well, anyway, this car, the people that were in it were on their way to a KISS concert. KISS has 4 letters, and it's all capital letters, which emphasizes the fact that it does have 4 letters. But the founder of KISS, Gene Simmons, got his name from Jumpin' Gene Simmons, whose only hit was Haunted House, which is why Paul Simon Will Fall on Halloween. And Jumpin' Gene Simmons opened for concerts for Elvis when they were both at Sun Records. And Elvis is symbolic, or hints at Paul Simon also. And Jumpin' Gene Simmons is a play on how the car jumped into the air here. And yeah, Simmons hints at Simon. Jumpin' Gene Simmons. Gene hints at the genes that are changed through the mark of the Antichrist, which changes a person's 23 genes, if you will, pairs of chromosomes, which is why this Gene Simmons sign here is exactly 23 months to the Dave Ball sign, but also exactly 2 times 30 years, which also hints at 23, which gives us 2 23s, as in pairs of 23 chromosomes, to the day that JFK was assassinated. He was shot in the head. Paul Simon will fall and injure his head. And John F. Kennedy was shot in a Ford Lincoln car, hence the connection to the Ford cars here. President Lincoln was shot in the head in the Ford Theater. The most famous video footage was shot by Abraham Zapruder. And Abraham Lincoln was shot in the Ford Theater. The guy Abraham shot the footage of Kennedy being shot in the Ford Lincoln. These parallels are all from God, right? Now, the Ford Lincoln, its peak of popularity was in the 1960s. JFK was the first of 4 major political assassinations in the 1960s. The Ford Lincoln car was known for the Lincoln Continental was known for its 4 suicide doors, which is why it connects prophetically with exactly 2 times 30 years, which pairs with this 4 and 4 here, to the suicidal crash of the car at the bridge that cost $4 million. In other words, the car was known for how it was, the mystery as to how it or why it crashed. It was suicidal. That's a hint at the suicide doors, the 4 of them of the Lincoln Continental. And again, because the 4 is because of for 3 transgressions, and for 4, the judgment being unavoidable now, but also the door that will be opened through to the bottomless pit, which is again Simon symbolism, as I already explained, because of music keys and all of that, and the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, JFK was shot in the head, which is why Paul Simon will injure his head, because of demonic possession of people's brains in their head, as their car and he was entering the on-ramp to the I-35 highway. There are other I-35 highways in God's big picture of signs that confirm what I'm about to say, but I won't explain that because, like I said, when the prediction comes to pass, it proves all the controversial things that I'm saying anyway, and I don't need to elaborate on everything, and furthermore, it's impossible. And anyway, 35 is 5 times 7, which is into the 5th of 7 trumpets, which describes the demonic possession of those who take the mark, which is the SHOT, which is why JFK was shot in the head at the I-35, the 5 times 7. And the on-ramp to the highway is symbolic of one's arteries and the blood in the arteries. The highway is symbolic of an artery. I already know that from other signs on the I-35, which again, I won't explain. But it's symbolic of the fifth of 7 trumpets. But also 5G frequencies. G is the 7th letter. 5G frequencies hints at 5 times 7. By the way, remember I said Paul Simon sang at the White House and Simpson died, who was known for bloody murder, exactly 5 times 7 days after the Japan plane sign, the car wheel on the wheel that fell on the cars in the Hertz parking lot. This is another case of this 5 times 7 here with the I-35. But it's the SHOT in the head that symbolizes the SHOTs into the bloodstreams, hence the highway, which demonically possesses people, which will demonically possess people as in with the 5G frequencies, hence music, Paul Simon, frequencies in the air, but also the 5th of 7 trumpets and 5G, G being the 7th letter. So you get the idea here. Okay, and also Bible prophecy says that these people that take the mark of the Antichrist, that become demonically possessed, it describes in the 5th of 7 trumpets that they will seek to commit suicide, but they will not be able to for 5 months. That's why the suicide doors and the suicidal car crash. It hints at how the prophecy says people will try to commit suicide, but will not be able to, which is why we can know that they are demonically possessed. Now again, this demonic possession will begin when the key opens the bottomless pit. And that will happen symbolically on March 22nd, 2029, which is exactly 41 months after the death of Dave Ball, as in Ballroom, as in The Shining, as in demonic possession. Again, 41 is equal to the word key in simple English gematria, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, which is why Paul Simon was born in the year 41, for example. Also, music keys are part of music composition, and Paul Simon is the goat of pop music composition. This day is the day on 322, which hints at Genesis 3:22, and the promise of immortality from the demons through the mark of the Antichrist, that it is predicted there will be a massive Mary apparition on the beach of Rio de Janeiro. Well, how did we know this? God pointed to this through music, the concerts of Lady Gaga and Madonna, but that's another story. Okay, this year, 29, hints at 9 plus 10 plus 10, 9/11. Revelation 9/11. The opening of the bottomless pit. The demons pretending to be Mary. Hence the 41 months, because 41 is equal to the key. It's also the 13th prime number, and the 2 antichrists, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Revelation, chapter 13. And 13 symbolizes the Antichrist anyway in the Bible, because Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Adam. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, was persecuted the Jews on the 13 days of the month, and the 2 antichrists are described in the book of Revelation, chapter 13. But the reason why the demon will pretend to be Mary on the beach in Rio and the whole world will know it, not like the other demonic apparitions of Mary, is because all apparitions of Mary in history have been demons. Absolutely all of them. There's no such thing as the Queen of Heaven or Mary. And 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 tells us that we get the deception we ask for, which is why that quote is the only quote on my flyer, which, by the way, if you would like to hand out, please contact me. It's the thing you need to be handing out right now. The typical evangelical tracts are largely based in error anyway. And you need to be, the sons of Issachar knew what to do because they knew the times that they were in. Now is not the time to be handing out the typical evangelical tracts. Jesus loves you. No, Jesus doesn't love everyone. It's not correct to say that. And furthermore, it causes them to be complacent. Now, let me just repeat. The reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove the things that I am saying, the controversial things, and one of them being that all Mary apparitions in history, including Lourdes and Fatima and the place in Bosnia, etc. All of them have been demons pretending to be Mary. Because Catholics typically don't read the Bible and they don't understand Christianity. And that's why they worship Mary, which is a repackaged form of fertility goddess worship, like Ishtar, Aphrodite, Isis, the pagan religion that came before Rome converted to Catholicism in the year 313 AD, which is why Pope Francis was elected on the date 313 in the year 13, because he's also the Antichrist in the 13th chapter of the Bible. So anyway, this will be the symbolic beginning of the opening of the bottomless pit. That's why it connects with exactly 41 months to the death of Dave Ball. Okay? And the Ford cars, because the bottomless pit is opened with the door that's unlocked with the key, 41, and the doors, the number 4 symbolizes the door, hence the Ford cars. One thing that I forgot to mention here is that Paul Simon sang about Apollo 11 here, and in the movie The Shining, the boy Danny is wearing a sweater Apollo 11 and stops at room 237 at the door. And the moon happens to be on average 237,000 miles away from Earth. The creators of The Shining claim that there was no intention behind that. That's just an accident. And I believe them. That's because I believe it's from God. Another thing is that there is a theme of blood in the movie, The Shining. For example, there's the iconic scene when the blood is flooding out of the escalator. And this connects, this diagram here, which connects it all together, involves this man, Chico, who shot himself, but again, he died on the following day, January 29th, 129, G129, the Greek concordance is the word for blood. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, Please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odysee.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.